Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Today we have with us a 1984 batch senior police officer who has also done law, is an engineer by degree, has gone to IIT Kanpur and has given 34 years of service in policing. He has done many cases related to terrorism, has been the director of Enforcement Directorate and has also dealt with a lot of other cases. We will today talk to him about his latest book and several other issues regarding policing. The book, we should tell you, has come out just now. It is called The Batla House, an encounter that shook the nation. So we are not wearing masks for this interview because we are sitting at a required distance. Welcome to the print, sir.
Thank you.
So, sir, if you could just tell us something about the book, because you at that time were leading that team of officers who had gone to Batla House for that encounter, which was later also termed as a fake encounter, and then a lot of controversy happened, and finally it was concluded that the encounter was not fake. In fact, the NHRC also said that the encounter was not fake. So if you were leading that team at that time, Special Cell also lost Mohan Chand Sharma, one of its inspectors that you have written extensively about in the book. So if you could just tell us briefly about first the book and then your experiences.
See, I have conveyed in the book about the journey of my officers, how difficult it is to work in the agencies like Special Cell. One has to devote almost 24 hours working, neglecting even the families. It also covers how the investigation is done and how it was done in that particular case. It conveys that investigation is hard work plus luck. Thereafter, it talks of Inspector Mohan Chand Sharma, his contribution, and what a loss was there for Delhi police to lose such a brilliant officer. Then it conveys about how the controversies can be created from thin air with different motives, but ultimately the law prevails. It also talks of certain inadequacies in the legal system, in the law, and finally it traces the origin of Indian Mujahideen, which actually started from Tihar jail, and ultimately how it was controlled, people were caught and almost eliminated at this stage.
So, sir, you are talking about also in the book regarding media trial. This is a word that we often hear these days. The current context being this Sushant Singh Rajput and Riya's case, wherein media is being accused of running a trial on its own, accusing one party, telling that the other party is innocent, and there are camps that are divided. So in this Batla House encounter that took place in 2008, also there were divided opinions about whether it is a fake encounter or whether it was genuine. Then a lot of newspapers carried stories that had said that that this encounter was not genuine. And then from your book only, I have a reference wherein your officer comes to you and says that ye akhbar mein kya chhapa hai, aap dekhiye. And then you say that there's a completely different story about how two witnesses had witnessed this encounter from another flat, from a bathroom window. So if you could just elaborate on that, about this media trial, because this is not a new phenomenon, it has been happening. But when it happens in cases like these, it does more damage than benefit.
See, I believe the role of media is very, very important. The freedom of expression. What they should present to the public, that becomes important. The role of media is to present the facts and not the opinion. If the facts are presented correctly, then the people can form correct opinion also. For example, in this case, you talked about one newspaper, 2 eyewitnesses. There were no eyewitnesses. Because if there were any, they could have come anywhere to any forum. Secondly, this building is a 4-story building and this flat was on the 4th floor. The nearby buildings were 2-story buildings. So nobody could have ever seen from those 2-story buildings into this flat. Similarly, opposite to it is another, if you say in the same building, from that bathroom it is not possible to see inside what is happening. It also talks of that post-mortem report says there were 3 bullet injuries from the back to Mohanchand Sharma. But post-mortem reports was telling altogether different. It talks of 2 bullet injuries and both from front. Similarly, it says that post-mortem report says Atif and Sajid has the injuries which can be attributed to the violence. But post-mortem report did not say that. So what I am saying is the factual narration is very, very important. Secondly, since media requires facts, how would they get facts? And therefore it becomes the responsibility of investigating agency to provide those facts which do not affect their investigation further. Anything which is under investigation, which can lead to further disclosures, further actions, that should not be shared with media, because everybody would be listening to it. More important in case of terrorism, if anybody comes to know anything which you are doing, they will take safeguards so that the investigating agency fails. So there are some boundary lines are required even for investigating agency and for the media to have a better communication within themselves and better communication to the public.
I think that is what we as reporters also face on a daily basis these days, sir, because the investigation agencies, whether it is the CBI or the ED or the NIA dealing with these sensitive cases, they are not willingly sharing information, the factual position, like you say. Of course, an investigation agency is not supposed to dole out facts that would impact their investigation, but at least something that can be shared so that misinformation is not spread.
Yeah, true. But one has to see how much to be shared. And that's a very delicate issue. And secondly, when you do not get the facts, you start collecting facts from some sources, which may not be genuine sources. And then what happens is, even the journalist may be believing something that it is a real fact, which may not be. So some sort of communication is required. Even the journalist should at least confirm from the agency whether these facts are correct or not.
Right. So, sir, when this happened, this newspaper carried this report about these 2 witnesses which the special cell was not aware of. And then it was like in the papers everywhere, everyone is talking about it. What was your experience? If you could share some anecdote.
See, experience is something which is totally factually incorrect. So what we felt at that time is rumors were coming into the media, and that should not be done. Because everything should be checked. If there were 2 witnesses, for example, where they have gone? They even did not spoke in Jan Sunwai. They gave no affidavit anywhere. And from where they were saying they could have watched, that was not possible. It also says that they were first taken down, they were fired there, and then they were dragged up. There was no drag marks. See, it is totally factually incorrect something, but you are putting in the media. Because people will start believing media.
So how difficult does it get for, say, an investigation agency who's anyway dealing with such a case of terrorism where so many people have lost their lives? You don't know if there are more blasts that are to happen, and then there is this entire media which is covering the case and somewhat not reporting the actual facts. So then how does an investigation agency like Special Cell deal with that?
It's really difficult. And then one has to deal with individual journalists, talking to them, finding out their views, and giving them those facts which can be given. So that I said is a very delicate issue. What should be shared and what should not be shared is a very, very delicate. And there should be some sort of regulation on both sides. For investigating agency also, what should be shared. For media also, internal regulations they can have. That what should be brought out in public domain and what should not be brought out in the public domain. Anything which can have adverse impact on investigation should never be brought out.
But sir, your first reaction when, say, you went to Karol Bagh and saw all those ruins, what the blast had done, and then you know that there are so many people injured, so many people, what is the first thought that comes to your mind? Is it that, how does an investigation begin? Because there is so much. It's like a it's a blind case of sorts. You don't know who the people were, getting witnesses together, then, you know, all the technical analysis that happens and goes, which you have beautifully explained in the book also. So if you could just take us through that investigation process as to how does an investigation kickstarts in a case like this, and where all does it go?
The scene of offense is very, very important. Like in this case also, in the Karol Bagh, the scene of offense indicated what type of blast it could have been. See what types of cutting of the articles was there. If it is a sharp, it generally is a high explosive. If it is jarred cuttings, it is a low explosive. What is a smell prevailing there? That can give you idea what chemical could have been there. Then what could be the approach of the people, how they have reached there? Could anybody be eyewitness? Is any explosive or any other parts of the explosive devices available there? The injured who were taken to the hospital, there is possibility also that a person who is perpetrator of the blast, he could have been injured. So immediately everybody in the hospital should be questioned. The people who have died, they should be identified. What is their background? So that we eliminate this, that the people who were injured or dead, they were not involved in that activity. So initially from the spot you get this. Then you have to find out who could have approached there. So there is a concept I have mentioned, dump data analysis. So there is a cell tower, any phone connected to that record can come. But in this case, they were not using the mobile phones. So you fail with that also. There were two eyewitnesses in this case. One boy was Rahul, a balloon seller. Another was an auto driver. They could help in telling the incident from where, what they have seen, what is the features of the people who did this. Then today we have large number of CCTVs available. So one has to go through the CCTV analysis. The explosive from where one could procure. In this case, 3 bombs were diffused. So we had the live bombs with us. We could know what is the frame of that. That frame indicated that the same devices were used in Jaipur and same devices were used in Ahmedabad. So that indicates the connection. So there is a possibility that somebody is behind all the 3 blasts. In this particular case, the Gujarat police was able to have a first crack, and on 15th of August of that year, and they had arrested some Simi people. But 2 persons who were knowing who are IM, Indian Mujahideen, they were able to escape. The persons who were arrested, they told in Gujarat that 3 numbers were used by these terrorists, Indian Mujahideen people. So these 3 numbers were analyzed. They had no outside communication. They were talking only to themselves. But for the investigating agency's luck, there was one incoming call to one of those numbers. The call indicated only 1 second. Generally 1 second in incoming calls means somebody disconnect. If you receive a call and if you disconnect, it will show call received, but duration 1 second.
So that exactly, that was my next question, that how did you reach Batla House? I think that call was what
so this
took you
is
to Batla
one
House.
is this call. Then the number which was from where the call was made, this number at that time was in Mumbai, never went to Gujarat, and its basic, this number basically belongs to Uttar Pradesh, Lucknow. The person was basically staying in Lucknow. Then his phone was analyzed. There was few calls from this Batla House area, from Atif's number. He had calls to various places, but our area of concentration was Delhi. Now simultaneously, when we analyzed those 3 numbers, one number has come to Delhi on 17th July 2008 and remained here for till 23rd July. Subsequently, when we analyzed Atif's number on 18th, so his number was also not showing call prior to 17th and after 23rd till 27th. 17 to 23, he was again in Delhi and his calls were there. So some connections were coming. The person has come from Gujarat, who is a terrorist. He has stayed in this area. This number is also in this area. This number also worked only that period, 17 to 23rd. And thereafter and before, this number did not work. So it is creating a doubt. And this number changed from prepaid number to postpaid number in August. On 18th, we got information from Intelligence Bureau. What happened is there was a thief, Usman. He was caught by Bombay police because there were 4 cars which were used in Gujarat, 2 in Surat, 2 in Ahmedabad at the hospitals. So that when the injured goes to the hospitals, relative come to the hospitals, the explosives in those cars explodes. But Surat, no explosion took place. So these cars were intact. Their numbers, their engine number, chassis number that indicated they were stolen cars from Navi Mumbai. So Maharashtra police worked hard. They interrogated a large number of thieves, car thieves. And ultimately on 17th or 18th September, they were able to question him and he says, yes, I have supplied cars to so and so. So he told that he took them to a house in Ahmedabad where he told that there are some number of people there, and 13 them, after planting the blast, they went by Rajdhani to Delhi on 26 July evening. That was the basic clue. So, but I thought if these people had gone from Delhi, so they might have got the return reservation from Delhi. So we checked who are the people who have all travelled from Rajdhani on that day. We examined them. 13 of the addresses were found to be non-existent. We checked, reservation was done for these 13 people from where? It was done from Nizamuddin railway station. So I inquired Mohanchand Sharma, where was Atif on that time when reservation was done. His position came there. So this creates more doubt. Thereafter we checked all their friends' records, something. So their locations had been found to the places. And there was one interesting conversation which was previous to it, but you could not connect. So Shakil was saying to Atif कि यहाँ पर ऑटो खड़ी करने की जगह नहीं है. Very innocuous. तो he says फिर कैसे होगा? कहता नहीं मैं मैनेज कर लूँगा. But if you see it subsequent, and his location was in Karol Bagh when he was talking to this. So this conversation, when combined with these people, then gives a doubt. Ki yes, there is something suspicious. And on this basis, it was decided to search that place and send the team there.
So taking you back to that email that came, Indian Mujahideen, at that time, the organization was not very active. In fact, not known. It's only after 2007 that it came to the notice of the agencies. So you have written extensively about how you tried to relate it with Simi, but there was no clear connection, and then later it was found that it indeed was an offshoot of Simi. So if you can just tell us something about Indian Mujahideen, how it began, and then how did you relate this case to IM?
See, Indian Mujahideen, if we go to the whole story of Indian Mujahideen, it is a pursuit of one man, Asif Raja Khan. He hailed from Calcutta and he wanted to become a terrorist and he wanted a training. He first joined Simi, but he left the Simi. Thereafter, he went to Kashmir, met the terrorists there that he wanted training. But they gave some training to him in Kashmir, but they were not able to send him to Pakistan. Ultimately, he was caught. He was sent to jail, Tihar jail. This is the one person. The second person was Aftab Ansari. Now, Aftab Ansari is basically a kidnapper belonging to Dinesh Thakur gang. He was caught in 1995 by my team itself, and Aftab, I caught myself chasing him along with a constable. This Aftab Ansari was also in jail. He became a friend of Asif. There was a third person, Omar. He belongs to Huji. He had come to India to get Huji terrorists released. They had kidnapped four foreigners, but fortunately the UP police team was able to rescue one of them. They actually searched the place in Ghaziabad for a thief, but there they got one of the kidnappee, and then in subsequent raid from a village in Uttar Pradesh, 3 more were caught. So this man, he is a hardcore terrorist. So they, in the jail, they make a communication with each other, and decided to work together after their release from the jail. Omar was released, 3 persons were released after this Kandahar hijacking.
Right.
So Omar was one of them. Aftab Ansari also came out of the jail after completing his jail terms. Asif also came out of the jail. Asif and Aftab started the kidnappings in India. They earned huge amount. With that amount, Aftab went to Dubai and he went to Pakistan in between. He talked to Omar. We need support for terrorist activities. Both of them went to Pakistan, Aftab and Asif Raja Khan, and they met Lashkar leaders, Jaish-e-Mohammed leaders and Huji leaders. And after that meeting, it was decided they will send a number of terrorists to India who will be settled in different parts of the country. They are called resident agents. So what they do is one person is sent, his Indian identity is established, he start doing some business, he even marry in India, and people believe he's come from West Bengal or somewhere. And thereafter more people come who they can give shelter. On the contrary, on the other hand, they would provide training to Aftab Ansari's and Asif Raja Khan members. They will also provide explosive. So this process started. And a number of terrorists were made resident agent in India. But Asif was caught in Agra. And then some of these terrorists from Pakistan, they were caught by Delhi police team. They were caught. So this was first blow to them. Asif Raja Khan, when was caught, he went to jail. But subsequently, he died in an encounter. His younger brother, Amir Raja Khan, had also shifted to Dubai after Asif Raja Khan was caught. So they decided to take a revenge. So they attacked American Center in Calcutta. After the American Center, Aftab Ansari took responsibility. They were caught. Amir was not caught. Aftab Ansari was caught. There was an encounter in Hazaribagh by Delhi police, and some of the terrorists were also killed in that. So their gang appears to be annihilated. But Amir Raja Khan re-established it. In Bangladesh, they have one Kamara alias Nata who was heading Huji there. He was supporting them. So the persons from Indian origin who wants to take training would go to Bangladesh, where new identity will be given to him, new passport will be made. Then he will travel to Pakistan. And in Pakistan, after the training, he will come back. So I give a detail only for one person, Babu Bhai, that how did he took training there? How did he stay after the training in a place in the airport, in a room in the airport? How Pakistani officers used to come to him and says, you do activities in India. Just to indicate that it is not that Lashkar-e-Toiba is doing or who is doing. There was a support from the ISI.
So the logistical support all came from Pakistan's ISI, but the residents were from India.
From India.
So the recruitments happened in India, and hence the Indian Mujahideen.
Yes.
Right. So another thing that you have mentioned in your book is the need for stricter reforms. So you're saying that the UAPA, which is the UAPA, did not have much teeth, and then TADA came, which was a stricter law, but then it also became very controversial after a lot of human rights activists started condemning it, because it had a lot of things which did not go very well.
CRPC, which is a CRPC and IPC. CRPC is a criminal procedure, and IPC is which is a substantive offence. Now, when dealing only with these, there is one section in IPC 121A, waging war against the state.
Right.
CRPC says you cannot interrogate a person, police remand cannot be for more than first 15 days. Then you have to go in search of terrorists. One terrorist is caught today, another may be caught after 10 days, maybe 2 months, 3 months. How to confront them with each other? So there were many other issues connected with, because terrorism, to deal with terrorism, you require a special law. Now we had knee-jerk reactions, which I mentioned in this.
Yes.
Like after 84, Mrs. Indira Gandhi was killed, we brought TADA in 1985. But then it was allowed to lapse in after 10 years, 1995. Then happened Parliament attack case. So we brought in 2002 POTA.
Yeah.
In 2004 again that was allowed to lapse. Some changes were made in UAPA, but they were not sufficient. UAPA was later on amended in 2008 and 9
Right.
to bring it today's status. So to deal with a law which does not fit to deal with terrorism is a difficulty. I mentioned one case specifically. Babu Bhai was arrested in Lucknow. A person named Guru was supposed to supply him some explosive in Lucknow. Now there are DK Basu guidelines of the Supreme Court. They're very, very well laid out. But some of the provisions of that says that every arrest is to be announced. In what sense is immediately after arrest, any person he says you inform is to be informed immediately. Maybe his family members,
Yeah.
maybe his friend. Within 12 hours, you have to put on your police control room in a center and in a state that so and so has been arrested and kept such and such place. Then you have to inform the police station in whose jurisdiction this person's house is there. Now this is very good, excellent provisions to help to restrain the police in doing something wrong. But are they useful in handling with terrorism? Suppose you catch a terrorist and he says inform so and so, and you inform. He informs other members and they vanish. They vanish to Pakistan, Bangladesh, anywhere. We do all the procedures, legal procedures, like producing him within 24 hours before the magistrate. But can his arrest not to be made public immediately? Now in this case, if his arrest would not have been made public immediately, and which is a legal requirement, it is no fault of the police officers, then there was a possibility that Guru could have been caught.
Yeah.
And you know who was Guru? If you read in the book, he was Atif. So many further blasts could have been prevented. So there is an inadequacy in laws to deal with terrorism. That is what I was referring to it.
So what about the current UAPA? It was amended in 2000.
See, current UAPA was amended. It is a better act, and there is a one provision in NIA Act, which again goes to my credit. When NIA Act was being made, a group of officers were called in MHA, and then I proposed that it should not be the first 15 days.
Okay.
It should be piecemeal and 30 days.
Okay.
Like you cannot have the remand for more than 30 days, but it could be you take 2 days now and you take 2 days after 10 months.
Right.
And that was accepted, and it is part of this. So that is the one tool we have got in benefit of us.
But so what about when UAPA was amended, there were a lot of questions regarding not enough checks and balances in place. The misuse of the new law. It did definitely give more teeth to the investigation agencies, including the NIA, but it also has a lot of other things related to it. So what about those things? Of course, you are an investigating officer. You say that everything goes case by case. Say if something is applicable to one case, might not be applicable to the other.
See, misuse of any law is done by whom? An officer.
Yes.
So you take action case to case basis against the officer. Rather than saying that law is wrong, the implementation could be wrong. And implementation of anything could be wrong depending upon the person to person.
Right.
And therefore we have to deal with those aberrations in the system and not to kill the messenger itself. Messenger is the act here. And whoever is doing wrong implementation should be taken to task.
So sir, if I could ask you this question, if you can tell me 5 challenges that you faced in a nutshell while investigating this case of serial blast.
The very first challenge is everybody start asking you who has done it, for example. And you have to keep your head down in spite of such questioning, because ultimately, even if you say, suppose Lashkar-e-Taiba has done it, how does it matter? You have to catch who really have planted the bombs. And therefore, you have to investigate from the spot. Second challenge in the bomb blast cases is the information doesn't come. Like the sources do not inform anything. In criminal cases, you get information. The terrorists keep to themselves. They don't talk what they are doing. So human intelligence, you don't receive. Third challenge is these people are very committed. And if they have done a blast here, they could do at other places. So there's a time challenge to you that they should be prevented from killing more people.
Right.
That is a third challenge. Then how to collect information? What could be the sources of information? So you have to go through, examine all the other cases. Any similarities? Any person caught in a similar case? And sometimes even that fail. We had investigated in 97 and 98, there were 42 blasts in Delhi and around. Nothing we could find at these spots. There were explosive, we could know it is a potassium chlorate. A lathe machine was used for making the shell of the bomb. The person made one call saying that Shahidi Khalsa force is doing it. So we did all possible investigation and we could zero down that person would be staying somewhere in western UP. Beyond that we could not zero down. For those small papers we could find out what are it belongs to which paper. Then which edition, and then with the intersection one could find out from that. But still there was no clue. Then we made a theory that these terrorists may be talking to somebody in Pakistan.
Right.
We made analysis of millions of calls. And from that, those cases was cracked. Nothing to do with any other information and investigation. Right. Terrorist-related cases, the evidences are not easy to get. And then there is a challenge during trial. Because evidences are difficult, witnesses are not there. So one has to be very effective in investigation. A good investigator who piece all the possible pieces of evidence together to present in the court. Any lapse in that would lead to failure.
So you have been in policing for so long. You've also been the director of Enforcement Directorate. So how much is the influence or the pressure of the ruling political party or the regime or the government in any of these cases? Because we have been hearing one cases of the Northeast Delhi riots. There are allegations that the investigation has tilted on one side in favor of one particular community because it was a Hindu-Muslim clash. Then if we look at Enforcement Directorate, there are allegations that the agency is only going after the opposition leaders. So you have been in those shoes. What if I ask you that is there some sort of political influence, some sort of pressure of the ruling regime, of the government that is in power at that point of time? How much does it affect investigations? And please be as honest as possible.
See, it depends upon officer to officer. Generally, no politician will talk to an officer who is straight. And every officer who is working in any department, particularly investigating agency, I believe should base everything on the evidences. We should not talk beyond evidences. So political pressure or no pressure, I feel it is a myth. And depends upon whether you are making a symbiotic relation or you are doing justice to the case. So as such, it may not exist. It may exist for those people who are looking for their postings, but not everybody.
So why did you write the book on this Batla House encounter now? What prompted you to do that?
See, I was in service all along. After the retirement, I thought that I should present the people and even the investigating officers about the officers working in field. Not only in special cell. Special cell is the sample. It is all police officers, anti-terrorist cell, working in any states. They have a tough life too. Secondly, to talk about the investigation, how investigation could be done. Thirdly, to tell about certain inadequacy in law. Covert operations are not legalized in our country.
Right.
So if a police officer infiltrate into terrorist organization, what is the protection for him? There is no protection. If he succeeds, You say कि भी बहुत बढ़िया काम किया. If he fails, you are abandoned. In various other countries, they have legalized covert operation. So my idea is to present views you face during investigation, the legal issues, and I also mentioned that we don't have a policy, national policy on terrorism. See, there should be a national policy irrespective of political affiliations.
Right.
Each person should believe that we have to protect our nation. Before speaking against any operation, they should ask the government, you show us why you are saying these people were like that. Based on rumors, commenting on anything demoralizes the people, and the resolve to fight against terrorism reduces, attenuates. So that is the purpose I wrote this book.
Thank you so much, sir,
Welcome.
for being with the print. So this was Mr. Karnal Singh, IPS officer of 1984 batch, who was with us talking about his recent book, Batla House, an encounter that shook the nation, along with various other things on how the evidence shaped up the case, how it was fought, the team, how it led the investigation. A strong national policy for terrorism is required. For more on his book excerpts, please log on to theprint.in to read that. For more information, you can log on to our social media websites, including Instagram. This is Ananya Bharadwaj for The Print.